Hello, and welcome to today's topic, landscape transformation on a budget. My name is Mary Ann Simon, and I'm a longtime landscape designer and educator. And this topic comes up all the time. So people are really excited about creating watershed-wise landscapes. But when they start looking at what's involved, they get overwhelmed and oftentimes ask, is there a way to do this, to create these types of gardens without it costing quite so much money? So that is why we came up with this class. Because as much as we aspire and want to inspire, uh, good morning, and welcome to today's topic, landscape transformation on a budget. My name is Mary Ann Simon, and I am a longtime landscape designer and educator. And I get asked this question all the time. Is there a way that I can create this type of garden without it costing quite so much money? So that is why we came up with this class. Our hope is that you can first understand what is involved, some of the details about creating a new landscape, and then how are some of the different ways that you can prioritize and potentially save some money as you make those choices. So the way we are going to navigate this topic, there's 6 different pieces of the puzzle. The puzzle serves as a reminder that everything is connected, that if we, pull on a string here, it has an effect there. So as we go through today's topic, we're going to start out with what is the vision. So if money was not an object, what would you want to have in your garden? Number 2, what are the elements of a garden? So sometimes people, think about plants, or maybe they think about a seating area, but there's actually a lot of different layers to creating a healthy, resilient landscape. So we're going to talk about that. And then number 3 is, what are your priorities? So this is where we're going to take a look at what costs a little bit more money, what potentially costs a little bit less, and then that feeds right into puzzle piece number 4, which is, where do you invest your money and where do you look at ways that you can save it? 5 is lots of fun, that is other ways to save, and then 6 is last thoughts. So let us go ahead and get started. So we're going to start out with the vision. This is actually something that I do with all of my clients. And I ask the question, and it's a little bit challenging, but it's like, if money were not the object, if money were not the issue, what would you dream? What would you imagine? So in many situations, we are starting out here. Maybe there's turf, some trees, some shrubs. We're not quite sure what we want. We've got a pretty good idea of what we want to let go of, but the question becomes, what do we replace it with? And oftentimes what happens is that we go to constraints first. We think about the money we don't have, and because of that, all of the things that we can't do. But for this first part of the class, for this first part of the exercise, I actually want you to think big, because it is surprising what we can accomplish when perhaps in the beginning we didn't think we could. So we're going to shoot for the moon and imagine what might be possible. So for some people, it might be the opportunity to bring the indoors out, to be able to gather with friends, with family in a beautiful environment, and share and laugh and just enjoy each other's company. For others, when they think of their dream landscape, they are imagining flowers and beautiful smells, and maybe they're clipping them and putting them in a vase. And the idea that they are moving through their garden in a very meandering way. And then for others, and again, this depends on how large your space is, the possibility of having like a secret garden or a little corner that is just for you. I had a client and they had a 13-year-old daughter, and they wanted to create a space that was just for her. So it didn't take a lot of room. We put some shrubs in, we put in a chair, a little table, and when she needed to, she could escape there, read a book, and just be by herself with the quiet of nature around her. Now, if you are interested in bringing in any kind of wildlife, birds or butterflies or what have you, you'll want a water feature. I've seen it happen almost immediately where we've turned on a fountain and then all of a sudden the birds, it's like they just hear the signal that there is some place to come to. And of course, if you have children, the possibility that you might want to create a space, again, that is just for them. Yes, if you have lawn, they can go out and play, they can roll around, and that's lots of fun. But there's a lot more that is interesting in nature than simply turf. So the possibility that in this space, kids could learn to touch things, smell things, potentially eat things, and really develop that connection with nature that many of our children have gotten rather distant from. So, of course, the question is, what if you don't have enough of this, or you think you don't have enough of this, and you don't have one of these? It is still possible that you can create something special, something lovely and welcoming. And it's going to take time, creativity, community, and resources. So that is all of what we are going to be talking about for the next 50 minutes or so. So that brings us to puzzle piece number 2. What are the elements of the garden? So there's 2 different areas that we're going to look at under this topic. First one is this element of what is the infrastructure and the functionality of the garden. So all too often when we think of our garden, we go right to how it looks, and we don't stop to think of what do we actually need our garden to do? What are the functions this garden needs to have? And regardless of what your vision is or your dream is, you need to create some sort of base plan and site analysis. So you really need to understand what is happening in your garden the way it is before you can figure out what you want to do with it. So there's some guidebooks that tell you how to create these base plans, but basically what you're going to do is get grid paper. You don't need a designer for this. You don't need a graphic artist for this. The grid paper makes it really easy to scale. So in this example, every little square represents 1 square foot. So if I wanted to measure 35 feet, for example, I would count 35 little squares, I would draw a line, and I would be all set. So what you're going to do is you're going to measure out the house, paths, driveways, garages, basically what is the footprint of your property. And then you're going to make a bunch of copies and you're going to do additional research. So there are layers to understanding your garden. The idea of making the multiple copies is you've got lots of room to make notes. So the first thing you're capturing is what are the microclimates? Where is it sunny? Where is it shady? Where is it chilly, perhaps, at certain times of the day? When do the winds come up? As much information about that microclimate as you can get, including the north arrow. So north is going to give you information about shade and shadows, and that's super important when it comes time to pick your plant palette or, potentially figure out where you're going to put that table for people to gather. Other things that you are looking at with this site evaluation is what happens to the water. So we're going to be talking about the importance of capturing rainwater, but it's really important to know, does the water flow away from the property? Does the water flow towards the property? If you have downspouts, do those downspouts go out into a drain and out to the street, or are they being directed out into the landscape, or some sort of combination? And then, of course, you will also want to be figuring out what is happening with your irrigation system. So where are the different components of it? And then where are your sprinkler heads? And what are the different zones that get watered when you turn it on? And all of this, again, is in the guidebooks that we will be sending you links to. So we have lots of information for you on that. So speaking of microclimates, some of the things you are looking at are, where is it deep shade? Where is that glaring sun? Maybe you have a house, a white house, or you've got a driveway, and as you walk up on it, there's all kinds of reflected light that's happening. So that may be something you're looking at. The quality of your soil. It almost doesn't matter what you are planting, but if the quality of your soil is poor, which is typically the case, I would say 99% of the gardens I've worked on have poor quality soil, then you need to know that, and then you will need a plan for improving the quality of it. And then what is happening to the rainwater? So there's rain, obviously, that falls on the landscape itself, but there's a tremendous amount of rain that falls on a roof that can be captured before it's taken out to the street. So if you have gutters and downspouts, you are checking to see where those downspouts exit. Again, is it going into a drain and right out to the street and we lose it? Or is it being directed into the garden and we can figure out ways to hold on to it? Now, this is a bit of an extreme image, but if you have a hillside or any kind of slope, you need to understand what is happening there. There are potentially erosion concerns. It may be that you've got ice plant on it or ivy on it or even turf. And once you remove those plants, you now have exposed soil. So you need to think about that, what it's going to take to remove that, and then potentially how quickly you can get it planted, because we don't want bare soil when the rains come. So the second part are of elements of the garden is, what is the user experience? How do you want to feel? What do you want to do in your garden? So when we had our lawn, it was potentially kind of limited. Maybe the kids played on it. Maybe the pets ran around on it. Maybe you walked from the, backyard. Maybe you walked from the kitchen out to the garage, but there probably wasn't a whole lot else that you were doing except having to take care of it. But now with these types of gardens, completely different situation. Now you're out there and you're seeing what is blooming different times of the year. You're watching the birds and the butterflies. Maybe your neighbors are stopping by, asking questions, curious about the work that you've just accomplished. Another element of the garden is, how are you going to move through it? So when there was turf, it was easy. You could just walk on the grass and get from one place to the other. But now you need to give it a little bit more thought, certainly with a path. In a moment, we're going to see images of the seating area. What is important is that whatever you put in stays permeable. We want rainwater to be able to move through it so that that rain can get into the soil. So we've got different materials here, some more expensive than others, but you never know what you might be able to stumble upon or get at a discount. We've got flagstone on the left-hand side. We've got concrete pavers on the right. They are interplanted. We've got thyme there. We've got small grasses there. We've got pebbles. You can use mulch. You can use decomposed granite. So again, the idea that you can do the same thing with gathering spaces. You can do small spaces, but you can also do really, really large spaces. So that image on the left, that's interplanted with Diamondia, which is a super tough, drought-tolerant plant, doesn't need a lot of water. The images on the right, they've probably got a combination of maybe decomposed granite and pebbles. Now, this next thing, shade, is definitely part of the user experience. I would say it also probably fits into functionality in that we do want to be bringing in the trees and a diversity of plants. But certainly we are seeing our climate change, temperatures going up. It feels like every year there's a new heat record. So whatever we can do to bring shade into the garden. Privacy. So it may be that you need privacy against what is happening someplace else, or you want privacy for your own space. It can be a neighbor, it can be the street, but what do you need to put into place in order to have that sense of your own personal world? And then the possibility, we went from turf that was pretty lacking in benefit, unless you have sheep or goats or horses. But for us In our more urban settings, perhaps we want to replace that turf with edibles or so perhaps we want to replace that turf with edible and or medicinal plants. The idea that you now have your own medicine cabinet right out in the backyard, or that you can pop out and grab some salad or some carrots or beets for tonight's dinner. And then, of course, the wildlife. I don't think I've ever had a client who did not ask for us to plant a garden that would invite the wildlife, be it bees, butterflies, lizards. I have lizards come into my garden, and I think it is just the coolest thing. So the idea that we can create a sanctuary, not just for ourselves, but also for the other beings sharing the space with us. All right. So we've been talking about all of these lovely, luscious things that we wanted to bring into our garden, which is important. We need to be excited. And now we need to look at our priorities, because if budget is an issue, it's possible you're not going to get everything you want the way you want it, maybe. So let's start. Priorities. If what you were imagining was, maybe a beautiful mosaic, maybe a pergola or a gazebo, I do need to let you know that those are big ticket items. They are more complicated. They may need permits depending on what you are trying to create. So unless you have someone that you know who's willing to do it for not a whole lot of money, or you have access to a lot of materials, this might be something that you put on the back burner. Lighting. So this is an example of a very well-designed lit garden. Now, unless you are in a situation where maybe there is no street light, so when you come home at night, it's actually a little bit dark, or there are potential trip hazards when there's not enough light, then yes, you may want to, in fact, need to invest in some lighting. But when we start talking about what is more aesthetic lighting, up lighting, down lighting, path lighting, you are definitely starting to increase your budget. Now, this next one, irrigation, you may look at and go, but I have to have irrigation. You may and you may not, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later as well. It doesn't really matter if you have spray or drip or want spray or drip. Irrigation is about 25% of the budget. And you can't, in most cases, simply convert your existing irrigation for any number of reasons to, for example, drip irrigation. So yes, we will talk about ways where maybe irrigation is not essential. And we do that in this next slide. All right, we are all about the watershed approach. If you watched any of our other webinars or attended any of our classes, you know that that is in every single class we teach, the watershed approach to landscaping. And there is nothing different here, that it is the foundation of any landscape that you are creating, regardless of what you are imagining. So I'm going to take you through it in case we need a refresher. On the left is what we would call a conventional landscape. So we had lawn. The soil is compacted, probably not a lot of nutrients in there, which means your plants may be struggling, not a lot of diversity. When it rains, even when you irrigate, most of that water is running off, so we're doing nothing to replenish our aquifers. Image on the right. This is what we aspire to. This is what we want to inspire you to do. It starts with the soil. It almost doesn't matter what you're planting. It starts and ends with the soil and creating this living soil sponge. We now have a lot more diversity in our garden, so it's not just this monoculture of turf. We have trees and shrubs and ground covers. We have contoured for rainwater capture, so when it rains, we're holding on to that. And as a result of those three things, we don't need nearly as much irrigation. So those are the four principles: that living soil sponge, holding on to that rainwater, selecting climate appropriate plants. And depending on where you live, that may look very different. And then finally, adding supplemental water, but only when necessary. So moving away from this assumption that if you have a garden, you need irrigation. And obviously this is certainly more relevant in arid and semi-arid climates. So as far as the steps that you need to take, planning cannot be overrated. The last thing you want to do is get in there, rip out a bunch of stuff, go to the nursery, and then bring some stuff back, stick them in the garden without having some idea of where you want to go, what you want to accomplish. And when it comes to saving money, planning is so important because otherwise you find yourself wasting things or buying things that you can't use or buying things that won't live in your garden. So this is definitely important as far as getting to that objective. Next, I've talked about soil. I will continue to talk about soil. It's about 10 to 25% of the budget, depending on what you need to do. It is 90% of the value. Now, I should say that the focus of our classes really is the living landscape. So we're not so concerned with hardscaping or lighting. It really is how do you create this foundation of a living landscape? And then we go from there. Creating that soil sponge. That is absolutely essential. And so is capturing the rain. So it doesn't really matter where you live. The climate is changing. So it might be that you used to live in a place and rain came all the time, and all of a sudden you're starting to get drought. We are seeing that everywhere. The opposite is true. You used to get, you would get rain in the winter, and now we're starting to get rain in the summer. So we are definitely things, oh my gosh. We are definitely seeing things get more volatile and erratic. So whether or not you get a lot of rain or you get a little bit of rain, getting the rain into the soil is super important, even in places where it floods. This helps with stormwater control. The more water gets held in the garden, the less of it is running off on the street and causing things like flooding. Now, when it comes to selecting our climate appropriate plants, obviously we are looking for the ones that require less water. So turf is considered the poster child for a high water using plant. But in places like Kentucky, turf is actually quite climate appropriate. Again, depending on where you live, if you live in a less So depending on where you live, for example, if you live in a more arid climate, then you are definitely looking at low and very low water using plants, right? We don't want to be bringing in plants that require more water than what we get with our natural rainfall, right? Otherwise, we're dipping into our water budget. This is what gets us in trouble. And then diversity. This is a beautiful thing to want in the garden. Nature loves diversity, and there are so many benefits to it. So for example, in this image, these are California natives. It's maybe April, May that they are blooming. There is a diversity in the types of blooms that you get, the colors you get, the smells you get, but as important, maybe more important, is the diversity that you get below the ground. So if I look at the far left plant, that is my typical turf. It grows to be about 2 to 3 inches if I'm lucky. There are some plants, some turfs, if the soil is better in an urban setting, maybe they grow to a couple of feet. But compared to these prairie plants in their natural setting that grow to 12 and 13 feet, we have a long way to go. And the thing that is so key about the roots is the more diversity there is in the roots, the more biology, the more diversity there is in the biology that comes with the plants or becomes attracted to the plants, the more biology there is in the soil, the quicker the health of our soil improves. So diversity is really a huge, huge key to to a landscape revolution. The other thing that diversity does is invites a bunch of different kinds of pollinators and natural predators, although we call them natural allies, right? So you don't have to go out and get a bunch of toxic pesticides. Instead, you're bringing in the ladybugs, you're bringing in the praying mantis, you're bringing in the parasitic wasps, and they are providing a natural control, which also means you're not bringing a bunch of poisons into the garden. Let's get to the meat of it. How do we save the money? How do we decide where we're going to invest versus whether? Okay, now we come to the meat of it. How do we decide where we're going to invest versus where are we going to try to save the money? You have to choose. It's either going to be time or it's going to be money. Or, I mean, it can be a combination of the two, but generally there is one that's that weighs a little bit heavier than the other. So if you have a lot of time and you can spend it, devote it to doing the work in the garden, that is a way you can save some money. If you have a lot of money, but you don't have a lot of time, then that's the way you're going to lead. And obviously, in both situations, you want that quality. So here's where you get to decide. You're either going to invest in a professional, and with a professional, you are saving time as well as benefiting from their expertise. So they have already made their mistakes. They have already figured things out, and they can potentially, come in, bang out a design, not bang out a design, but create a design with you, and then, have the installation done and it's finished. The other option, obviously, is that you decide that you want to do it. And perhaps you've already been doing it, but maybe you need to educate yourself in some areas. And as a result of that, because you're not having to pay someone else, you are going to save some money. And you potentially will learn from your own mistakes. But there are benefits to doing it yourself. There's definitely something very empowering about doing it yourself. So yes, obviously you will save money unless you're not really prepared, in which case you're maybe wasting money. But the big thing that you get out of it, the big thing that you're going to get out of it is a much deeper understanding of what you are creating. So if someone else comes in, does the design, installs the garden, boom, they're done, you have a finished product. But if you are the one who has figured out all the different plants, has mapped out where the irrigation tubing is going to go, has gone to the nurseries and talked to everybody and figured out exactly what you want to do, you will so much benefit from that deep dive into this product. You will benefit so much from that experience, certainly in maintaining it because you know what it took to put it in. And then also really, really important is that it stimulates our creativity. We unfortunately have gotten very, very comfortable with our phones, with turning to AI for all the answers. So creating a garden really is an opportunity to, think out of the box, to work with others, communication, discovery. It really is a very, very different experience. So let's go ahead and start with design. We said up front, very, very important. If you don't, things can go rather super important. You don't want to get in there and just start tearing things out without knowing where you are headed. So designing it yourself is quite possible. I've been designing now for 20 years, but in the beginning, I didn't know anything either. I actually didn't even know landscape design was a profession. So it takes time, it takes research, it takes going out to nurseries and learning things. And we are happy So designing it yourself is absolutely possible. I've been a designer for 20 years now, but in the beginning, I didn't know anything. So similar to potentially some of you, you're going to need to figure out what it's going to look like. You're going to look to different resources. You're going to do the research. You're going to study, but it is possible. We have guidebooks to help you along the way. We'll send you links for that. There are also all kinds of templates that are out there. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You can get creative, but you don't have to get that creative. And the thing is, even if the template comes from an area that is not necessarily your area, you can still adapt it. So a tree is a tree is a tree, regardless of where you live. However, an oak tree is different than a maple tree. So what you are doing is you are looking at the configuration in a template, and then you're swapping out the plants. So if they recommend a shrub, what is a similar shrub that will work with your climate, that accomplishes the same objectives? And then there are classes. So we have classes, we've got free classes on our other site. There are all kinds of classes in your community. Master gardeners have classes. This is definitely an extremely popular topic, and there are lots and lots of folks like you who want to know more. Now, it may be that after everything I've discussed, you're thinking, nope, not interested, don't want to design it myself. I'm not artistic. I'm going to need some help. I completely get that. That's why I get hired. But I will say that there is something to be said for taking the time and doing a little bit of homework. So finding images that you resonate of different gardens, taking pictures of plants that you like, so that when you come together with a professional, you are starting from a place of having a pretty good idea of what you want. Now, of course, they're going to provide their expertise and say, you know, that plant is beautiful, but it's not going to work in your garden. Or, you know, you want to do this particular structure, but that's a little bit more money than I think you are willing to pay. So that's where their expertise really comes into play. But by having done that initial work, it means that you will have a better working relationship with the designer, and potentially it will actually speed up the process and save you a little bit of money. And so what you're doing is you're really taking advantage of their knowledge and their experience. As we said, they've already made the mistakes. I have made the mistakes. And so, you know, they can also envision things that maybe you didn't realize were possible. So that's also really helpful. You know, the idea that they can look out your garden and say, hey, had you ever considered doing this? Or, you know, we can create a little mini golf course for your kids or what have you. But just that they are bringing their imagination and their expertise to the table as well. Now, if you have a hillside or a slope, this might be the situation where you do need a professional. So working with hillsides, with slopes, if there's any sort of water issues, if you want to capture rain, if you have ivy or ice plant or even turf and you're thinking of removing it, what we don't want to do is leave bare earth. Certainly not right before the rains, because bare earth is just going to start washing right away. So if you've got a situation like that, or potentially there's like flooding that happens when you get the rains, then yes, bring in some professionals to help you. All right, let us talk construction. If you have turf, that may be one of your first priorities, is to get rid of it. For my part, this is where I would hire a professional. It is hard work, not only to remove that turf, but then you have to dispose of it. So if it's a little area, yeah, maybe you can go out there with a pick and get it out. But if it is a larger area, this might be where you want to bring in a professional. However, you can do it yourself. You can absolutely rent a sod cutter. You can absolutely rent a dumpster. You can bring in family. You can bring in friends. You can do it by yourself, but you know, it might just take a little bit longer. The big thing we ask is that you stay away from glyphosates, which are basically those chemicals that kill the grass. That old saying, if something looks too good to be true, it probably is. So yes, it kills grass, but it is not, there are still, so yes, it kills the grass in a couple of days, but there are consequences to that. Anytime we apply any kind of toxin, there are consequences. And then how do you plan to dispose of it? So again, if it's a little bit of grass that you're getting rid of, you can put it away in the trash bin. Some areas will let you put it into a green waste bin. You can haul it away to a dump or call someone to do that for you. The thing about lawn, if it's been removed with a sod cutter, is you've removed not just the turf, but also the soil below it. So it gets really heavy, and you are not necessarily getting rid of as much of it as quickly as you thought possible. And then the last way, which initially may seem like the most expensive, is also the easiest. You hire a dumpster. You may need a permit. You need to plan for that, but they come in, they drop it off, you fill it up, and away it goes. And that is the end of it. So you can do that just as easily as a contractor can. Now, when it comes to the rainwater capture, whether this is you or the landscape contractor, make sure it happens. Even if you can't connect to a downspout, that's the situation sometimes, you can absolutely create shallow, 3 to 4 inches deep basins where when the wall, 3 to 4 inches, you can absolutely create basins. They don't have to be very deep, 3 to 4 inches, where when it rains, that water will pond and stay there long enough that it can actually absorb into the soil instead of what usually happens, it runs off. So again, whether it's you or your contractor, make sure that there is some way of holding on to that rain. And then sheet mulching. So we have a bunch of different classes on sheet mulching. It is critical in terms of how we make that transition from dirt, basically, to that soil sponge. So when I teach these classes live, I will bring in a sponge with me, a kitchen sponge or a sea sponge, and I will say, what are the similarities between this and what you see on the screen? And people will shout out, oh, there's like little tunnels, little pockets. Yes. So the same quality in a kitchen sponge that allows you to mop up a spill works with a soil sponge in allowing it to hold onto the water, right? So it holds onto the water when it receives it, and then it slowly releases that water to the plants as they need it. Other signs that this is a yummy bit of soil, a yummy handful, is that juicy worm running right through the middle of it, and the roots. So the roots are not all smushed up into the top. They are spread out, they go deep, and this lets you know that the plant has a nice anchor, is accessing all kinds of biology in the soil. In the guidebooks, we show you how to do it. This is one of the easier things to do yourself. Jokingly, it's an opportunity to catch up with family and friends, yes, and hopefully they are working. But the materials are easy. You don't need any equipment. You will need mulch and you will need compost in large quantities. Easier to get it in bulk. So when you're buying in bulk, you're buying by the cubic yard. Typically, the cubic yards themselves are not that expensive. What can get to be a little bit more pricey is the delivery, because it's coming in on a truck, but probably still cheaper than buying that same amount in bags, right? Key thing you want to be aware of is the quality. The best thing for mulch are tree trimmings, and we're going to send you some links for that. And in this example here, I have a garden that's about 1,000 square feet. I need 10 to 12 cubic yards of mulch, about a third of that for the compost. The reason being is I need 3 to 4 inches of mulch. So I'm not just sprinkling it across the surface. It is a deep amount of mulch. We need that mulch to cool the soil, to help hold on to water. And very importantly, as that mulch breaks down, that is how we feed the biology. So they need the compost and the mulch in order to accomplish that. Planting is absolutely do-it-yourself, certainly for the smaller plants. Again, in the guidebooks, we give you directions on how to do that. It is not simply, yank a plant and stick it in a hole. There is a better way to do it so that less of your plants go into shock and die, but is certainly easy to do. And the thing about plants themselves is they are probably the cheapest thing in all of this. So seeds are cheap, maybe $1.99 or $2.49 for a whole packet of them. You can certainly do root cuttings. You can get a root stimulant, a root hormone, so you can actually put cuttings directly into the ground. And if you're going to buy plants, buy them as small as possible. There is no reason to be bringing in giant plants to put them in the ground. The exception is going to be a tree, but certainly ground cover you can buy in a flat. So flats are maybe $35, $40, but you're going to cut this up into small pieces. And you can get anywhere from 16 to 64 units. I've never been able to get 64, but 16 is pretty easy. 32, pretty easy. And this allows you basically to do, potentially your entire front yard for $40. If flats are not available or you're doing larger plants, again, as small as possible. So you can do quarts, 1 gallons. Just about all of my gardens get planted in one garden. Just about all of my plants get planted as 1 gallons. And sometimes I'm going to bring in a 5-gallon if I'm doing a hedge or I'm doing a focal plant and I want to be able to get that size. But what they have found is that when the plants are smaller, they actually will outgrow the larger plants. Because one of the biggest problems is that plants don't get upgraded to the next size when they should. So oftentimes what will happen is in the larger sizes, they're not transplanting them. And so you'll get this root curling that'll start to happen. And in fact, that's a great recommendation, which is whenever you're buying plants, don't just look at the top of it, look at the roots. If there are roots that are coming out from the bottom, do not buy that plant. You're better off buying a smaller plant without those roots because they've got room to spread out, and then they will easily transition to your garden. Now, I talked about trees. This is where I would do a 15-gallon. That's what I've always planted in my gardens. Sometimes people want bigger trees. The bigger the tree, the more expensive it's going to get. The more you're going to need people to help you to do that. At a certain size, you're going to need cranes because the weight of those trees just gets so large. Now, why use more plants? It's possible that you're thinking, well, maybe I don't have to put in as many plants. And we would say, yeah, that's not a great idea. So we've been promoting diversity and how important that is, but we also want to promote density. So the thing about plants is the more diversity you have, the more density you have, means the more roots we have, the more biology we have. The more biology we have, the more quickly the soil is going to change. And even though it doesn't seem intuitive, the more plants we have actually means the less water we're having to apply. Because as the roots grow, so does the reservoir to hold that water, right? Where the roots are is where the biology is where the water is. The last thing is that your plants create shade. So wherever you have plants, you've got soil that is cooler, you've got shade, so wherever you've got plants, you've got shade, even if it's a little bit, you've got cooler soil, which means you don't need as much water. Now, one of the challenges that sometimes present themselves is you're choosing, or I'm choosing, or your designer's choosing a big plant that will ultimately grow to be 6 or 8 feet wide or larger. And so you want to make sure you've got space for it. But it's not going to get to that size overnight. It's probably going to take a few years. And in the meantime, you have all of this bare soil and your plants are kind of lonely. So if that's the case, then that is a great opportunity to bring in ground cover, to bring in annuals that are only going to live for a season, to sprinkle wildflowers, to bring in short-lived shrubs that are only going to live, 3 or 4 years. And then by that point, your larger shrubs will get established. 1 gallons are pretty much the same price, regardless of what the plant is. So there are exceptions, for example, camellias might be more expensive, succulents might be more expensive, but generally speaking, a 1 gallon is about the same price. However, some 1 gallons will grow to be 2 feet wide and some will grow to be 8 feet wide. So depending on your budget, this might be a way that you can save a little bit of money as well. Now, here is the big question. Do you really need that irrigation? Certainly in arid, semi-arid areas, there is the paradigm that if we have a garden, we need irrigation. But with this watershed approach, with that working on our soil, capturing our rain, selecting climate appropriate plants, that need for irrigation will drop significantly. When we think of native plants in their natural settings, they don't get irrigation, right? A little bit different in the garden, but the principle is the same. Now, it's possible that some of your plants are going to need a little bit more water. In this example, we have a bunch of low water using plants and a maple. So yes, that maple needs a little bit of extra water, but I can provide that with a hose. I don't have to set up an entire irrigation system for it. Now, other people will go, well, I have an irrigation system. Can I simply convert? No, maybe. There are some cases, typically when we get asked that question, it's, is your irrigation older than 5 years, in which case not a good idea. And was that irrigation installed by you, or do you have drawings for what was installed? Because the big problem, one of the big problems, is that irrigation systems don't get installed properly to begin with. So you are taking over and converting something that was never really well done to begin with, and then patching onto that. So certainly if it's older, this is, again, a landscape I worked on. The irrigation probably as old as the house, which was built in the 60s or 70s. So no, this needs to be abandoned. If you need irrigation, and in some cases you do, maybe you travel a lot and you can't fit, and it's a new garden, it needs to be watered regularly and you can't do that or find someone to do that for you, then okay, you're investing in that irrigation system. And if you're thinking, is there a way, even with irrigation, that I can save a little bit of money? Maybe. So where it is key is with the plumbing, with the valves, probably installing the laterals. If you're bringing in a irrigation timer, that needs to be connected properly. They may even help you with your schedule. Because the thing about irrigation is if you are getting an irrigation system, this is a place to invest. Because things that can go wrong with an irrigation system go beyond simply your plants dying, although that is a terrible thing. But you can have leaks, you can have floods, you can create situations where people slip and fall. So definitely irrigation, if you're putting it in, bring in someone who knows what they're doing. Where you might be able to save a little bit of money is with the tubing. So I'm assuming we're talking about an irrigation system that is a drip system. They do the plumbing for you. They're going to connect you to a riser, which is how we get from the pipe underground to the surface where the tubing gets attached. And then once the plants are in place, because the tubing goes in afterwards, you can go ahead after reading some booklets or watching some YouTube videos, putting your drip tubing in place. And then you might just want to consider hand watering. That's what I do. I live in Los Angeles. I did work on my soil. I've captured my rain. I've got climate appropriate plants, and maybe I'll water a few times over the summer. But I've been able to get away with it. Lots of people have been able to get away with it. So it is something to consider. Okay, a few words about not using a professional. So this is potentially you are working with someone that you have hired who is not a landscape professional. Odds are they are unlicensed, probably no insurance, not bonded, and in some cases the knowledge may be limited. But the big thing you need to be aware of is that you are now responsible for anything that happens, whether it is on your property or on someone else's. So for example, if they put in a tree and they improperly plant it or stake it and it topples over, you are responsible for any damages, whether that damage is in your garden or if you've knocked over a fence, that fence needs to be repaired and it is on your dime. So just something to think about. Again, that idea that sometimes in the attempt to save a little bit of money, we actually end up losing a lot more. It is quite possible you have come along with me so far and you've gone, wow, this is way more than I can take on, at least at this point. But I want to dip my toe in. I want to give this a chance. So you don't have to do the whole thing all at once. This is how me and my husband started. You can do a small amount. So in this case, front yard, they were not ready to take out the entire turf, but they did want to start experimenting. So they took out 3 feet, removed that turf, improved the quality of the soil, added compost, mulch, no irrigation. They're going to hand water this, and they're going to go ahead and bring in some natives. Now, it is quite possible that this is still too much, or that you're ready to do one part of the garden, but not the other. So for example, you want to move forward on the front yard, but you're not ready to tackle the backyard at the same time. So what you can do is you can leave your turf in place and you can overseed it. Along the way, you are also improving the quality of it so that at a certain point down the road, if you want to, you can remove that turf and bring in other plants or do something differently with it. So what we're going to do is we're going to overseed it with things like clover, which fix nitrogen. You can overseed it with wildflowers. You can overseed it with small shrubs. And all of that is going to help build the soil and improve the resiliency. Now, as part of that process, you may need to dethatch. Dethatch, you typically have to do with a warm season grass like a Bermuda or St. Augustine. What will happen is you will get a buildup of dead grass and dead roots, and it becomes almost impermeable, like the water can't even get through it. So you're going to scrape it up. There are these special rakes, dethatching rakes. You're going to get rid of it. You only want to do it when the weather is more mild because it is stressful to the plant. And then we got to get oxygen into the soil. Comes back to that biology in the soil. It's compacted, so we have to do something. What you're going to do is core aerate. So unlike the myth where you could go out with your soccer cleats and do that, we actually need to get the plugs out of the soil, right? We don't want to compact it first. And then you roll a 1/4 inch of compost. You can put seeds into this and do it all at the same time. We don't need a lot, just a 1/4 inch when we're talking about doing that with lawn. And guess what? Another thing, you don't have to mow as much. We want our grass to grow taller. 4 inches is great. Reasons being that every time we mow the lawn, the resources of the plant move from the roots to the blades. And what we want is we want our roots to expand. We want them to go down deeper and spread out further. So the less frequently we mow, the greater our roots can grow. The other thing is, believe it or not, 4 inches of grass creates more shade than 2 inches of grass. So the shade means, again, that it is cooler and we need less water. So we've got some photos here. We actually call the process rewilding your lawn. The existing lawn stays. We've improved it by adding the compost, core aerating it, and then we're going ahead and bringing in our plants. The image on the left is where we started. Then we started overseeding. And then things started coming in. That image on the right is actually some of the wildflowers that are starting to come in the springtime. Okay, other ways to save. There are free things out there, free mulch and compost. Go online and find out what is happening in your area. Sometimes master gardeners will do it, or high schools will have that, free giveaways. Oftentimes you have to pick it up yourself. You bring some trash bags and some shovels. In some cases, they will deliver, but that's available to you. Getting free mulch from tree trimmers. So if you're having your trees trimmed, ask whether or not they can ship it up for you. There's also an organization called Chip and Drop. We will give you a link for that, where they bring together tree trimmers and homeowners. Because tree trimmers, every time they take green waste out to the dump, have to pay for it. So they would much prefer being able to leave that with you. Disclaimer, if you get a load from them, you cannot ask for a particular kind of tree, and you can't ask for a particular amount of, you can't ask for a particular quantity. So you may get more than you had planned for, which is why it's great to ask your neighbors to join you in this process. Now, another thing that you can do with green waste, for example, you've had your tree trims or your hedges trimmed, is something called hugelkultur. Hugelkultur is actually one of the other classes we have on the website. And what it is that you take green material and you repurpose it. So in this example, they've actually put it into a rain garden, and this will enhance the functionality of our rain garden. And then this example shows you what is possible after they've been completed, and they fill them with mulch and soil and compost, and then they plant them. And this is maybe a year, 2 years after that hugelkultur went in. Pretty spectacular. Now here's a great way to save money. Skip the weed fabric. Weed fabric is not biodegradable and actually grows weeds. So yes, you are getting some weeds that are growing up from underneath, but many of the weeds are actually coming from above. They come in with the wind, they come in with the lawnmower, they come in with the birds, and then they send down their roots, and then you try to pull them out and you just get a great big mess. So instead, you can use paper and compost and mulch. That sheet mulching accomplishes the same thing better, all breaks down, and costs much less money. Now here's another one. It may or may not have come up for consideration, but obviously we want you to put in a rain garden. It can be simple contouring, 3 to 4 inches. It can be something a little bit more complex. But a lot of pictures that we see of rain gardens have a bunch of boulders and cobbles. They look like those dry creek beds, right? Those cost money. They are heavy, they require labor, and they are expensive to deliver. And you don't need them. They are purely for aesthetic purposes. You can plant your rain garden for way less money, and it actually is better as far as creating a permeable, porous soil. Plants generate that pathway, whereas boulders do not. Other great ways to save money, all kinds of plant sales and giveaways. Just about every weekend you can walk down the street and somebody's having a garage sale and they're giving away plants. And then the possibility that you may need to simplify the vision. But simplifying the vision doesn't mean that you've let it go. So we had this vision, maybe we wanted to do an outdoor kitchen with a bar and all of that. And yeah, that's expensive. But if ultimately the goal was to gather with friends and family and laugh and enjoy each other's company and eat good food, you can do that with a picnic bench and a chair. So again, just because the vision doesn't look exactly like how you envisioned it, doesn't mean that the underlying objectives can't be met. We talked about moving through the landscape, the possibility that you can just use mulch. A path is where there are no plants or obstacles. So if you need to get from, the back door to the garage, make sure you've got an area where you don't have plants. And then down the road, you may find the perfect material to put down, or somebody's giving it away. And then you can come back in and redo your pathway. water features. You can go to nurseries and they actually have some pretty inexpensive fountains. You need an outlet for sure, although they've got battery operated pumps. They've got solar pumps. Hard to say how well those work or for how long they work. But you don't have to get fancy. Literally, it is just a pot that can hold water. That's what I did in my garden, and some sort of submersible pump, right? And you do want to make sure that there is a pump. We do want that moving water, and the birds will come, the insects will come. Yeah, if you install it, they will come. And then the possibility of making your own compost. So compost and mulch, not all that expensive, but what a great way to get rid of your own green waste. Instead of taking it out to the green bin, or potentially it's going in the trash, depending, what they have where you live. So you can do a compost pile. You can also do a worm bin. Worm bins will take less green waste. It takes a little bit longer for those worms to do their work, but super cool and fun, and kids get a real kick out of it. And then garage sales. I love garage sales. I love the idea of finding treasures, of taking something and repurposing it. So for example, as I'm looking at this image, over on the far left, I don't know if it's a bed frame or some old gates or something, but I could take that and turn it into a trellis for my squash or my bean plants. I could take that little table and put it outdoors. And the great thing about, gardens is that it's okay if things look a little bit distressed. It's okay if things don't last forever. It's outdoors. And then Facebook is super cool. There's free things on Facebook, and then there are certainly things that have been reduced significantly. People are moving and they just want to unload the stuff. So check that out as well. And then using found materials. So I used to dumpster dive when I was doing more of this. You never know, talk about treasures. What people throw away is incredible. But in this case, these were pieces of wood that were found, repurposed, and tied up, and make for a great trellis for anything that you are growing. And then, of course, anything can be a planter. So 2 disclaimers. One, almost anything can be a planter, in that you do need to make sure that it has good drainage. So what we don't want is we don't want a pot to be in standing water. If that happens, you get that sort of funky water thing that happens, it smells bad, and you've actually created an environment for anaerobic life. And that is where our pathogens come from. So if you leave a plant in standing water for too long, eventually you will kill your plant. The other thing to be aware of is if you are planting edibles. You need to be aware that whatever the soil is touching is potentially going to be absorbed into the soil itself and then into your edibles. So make sure that that inner lining is non-toxic. All right, last piece of the puzzle, last thoughts. We're going to share with you a case study. Like many of you, potentially there was turf. In our case, we had some palm trees. They actually had a little brick well. Initially, we wanted to remove it, but they really loved it, so we left the well. This is after, you can see the well there. This is after removing the turf. And we put in some oak trees, actually. I believe they took down those palm trees. And yeah, this was maybe a week or 2 after everything went in. You can see how small everything is except for those trees. And then we got rain. And I think all of us have had that experience in the garden after a rain. It's like everything magically grows and things pop into bloom. So the garden had been in place for a little bit when we got this rain, but again, there's a rain garden, there's plants around it. You can see some cobbles there. The reason we do that in this scenario was to help with erosion. So if you've got water that's coming from a downspout and it is flowing very, very quickly, you could start to erode that area. And so the cobbles help slow down that velocity there. And then this is that same garden maybe a year later, a year and a half later. So it is amazing how quickly, when you do that soil work, when we get the rain, how quickly these gardens come to life. Other things to be on the lookout, and maybe you are already starting to gather your resources, but there is a lot of focus on converting our gardens to more climate resilient landscapes, whether there's a focus on taking out turf or maybe bringing in a smart controller. Lots of organizations are focused on doing better for the planet via our gardens. Speaking of controllers, this might be something you want to invest in. In some cases, there are rebates for them. What you want to look out for on a smart controller is that WaterSense label. So WaterSense is under the EPA, and they vet different products to make sure that they are as efficient as possible. And what they have found is these WaterSense approved smart controllers are upwards of 20% in water savings over other controllers as well as manual controllers. So these automatically set the schedule. You don't have to go out there and change things and get a rain sensor or what have you. They do it automatically. Speaking of EPA WaterSense, they have a great website. So they don't necessarily have rebates or incentives that's going to come, from your local providers, but they have all kinds of resources and information. So if you wanted to know more about creating a drip system, if you wanted some landscaping tips, they have videos, they have articles. They also have a list of professionals that you can access through their website. And then who can help? So as I mentioned, there are a lot of organizations, a lot of people who want us to be doing this well, who want us to be doing this correctly. So it starts with the water agencies who want us to conserve that incredibly precious resource. Cities, you're looking at a sustainability department, a public works department, maybe a water conservation or stormwater department. They want these gardens to be working well. Master gardeners love to teach. They love gardens and they love to share what they are learning. So, check out a Master Gardener program in your area, community gardens. So it's possible that you have a small area and want to expand or just want to learn more. So visit a community garden. You can talk to people. Sometimes it's a way of exchanging seeds or cuttings. And then the last thing is vocational training. So there are vocational schools, even higher education have different programs for designers, for contractors, for what have you. And so these are people who want to be able to use their skills. And because they may not have as much experience yet, their prices might be a little bit more. And then you've got these vocational training resources. So these are vocational schools, potentially, they're colleges or community colleges where people are learning some of these skills and they want the opportunity to go out and, learn and are potentially charging less than folks who've been out in that business for a longer period of time. And then here's the last thing, and this is just a really cool idea. We talk about it takes a village, to raise a child, to take care of our elders or what have you. But the possibility that we can look to the village to grow our gardens. So we don't have to do it alone. We can share a load of mulch. We saw how much came in. That would be a lovely thing to share. We can start a tool bank. So maybe you have a shovel, your neighbor has a hoe, someone else has a rake, and you lend it to each other. So not everybody has to not only buy it, but store it. Raising a barn, that is getting together with some folks and going, I will help you with your garden if you're willing to help me with mine. And people come in with different skills, different expertise, different strengths. And then again, we've talked about how easy it is to share plants, whether it's seeds or cuttings, or pups, if you're into succulents, lots of different ways to make that abundance go round. And finally, to enjoy the process. So what you are potentially creating is an oasis. In the wild and crazy world that we live in, to have a space outdoors where we can get quiet, where we can commune with the wildlife or even our own family and friends is a real blessing. So don't worry so much about the final outcome. Enjoy the journey, share it with those you care for, and have fun because the benefits are really tremendous. So thank you for being with us today on this topic. May your landscape transformation be exciting and joyful, and happy gardening.